Hello, I'm Natasha. Welcome back to my channel, and in today's video I want to discuss why nothing really works in the UK anymore. And this is a follow-up to the previous video which I did about why I believe that foreign direct investment rules in the UK need to change. Now, I think that the UK has major problems with its infrastructure. How much is this to do with the fact that the UK does not have overarching control of its infrastructure and has just sold it off to a mirage of foreign investors who are more interested in profits than anything else? The Financial Times reported that in 10 years from 1997, foreign ownership rose from 30% to 50% in everything from the motor industry to investment banking. From 1990 to 2007, nearly 40% of companies involved in rail, airports, gas, water, roads, and other facilities had a degree of foreign ownership. However, there is a tension between the needs of operating companies to make a profit, while at the same time honouring obligations to provide reliable infrastructure to their customers. Deregulation and privatization occurred in the 1990s, and this led to profits in electricity companies soar from 249 million to 1.5 billion. In water companies, profits increased by 147%. If we look at something like the water network now, almost 3/4 of England's water industry is currently owned from overseas. But there have been issues with this foreign ownership in this sector previously, and nothing was done to rectify the situation. Just to give an example, Thames Water was snapped up by RWE, a German company, and profits climbed to 346 million in 2005. The jump in earnings was achieved despite a failure to develop or fix the infrastructure. From the time RWE took over, Thames Water failed all regulatory leakage targets. By 2005, its pipe infrastructure was in such disrepair it leaked 196 million gallons a day. This didn't stop it paying the mainly German owners nearly 1 billion in dividends. So even in 2005 there were issues with the infrastructure, but it doesn't seem to this day that water companies have done much to improve the infrastructure in place. Surfers Against Sewage have released their annual water quality report for 2023. This report claims that raw sewage was discharged on average 1,090 times a day in 2023. The lack of robust regulations and oversight in the UK allow these companies to get away with this, and ultimately I predict that when essential infrastructure requires updating, it will be the British customer who will have to pay for this. Then there is the issue that we have with our energy suppliers. Of the 6 big energy suppliers in the UK, 4 are foreign owned. The head of Ofgem, Alistair Buchanan, has had concerns about the domination of foreign firms in the domestic market. One concern being that foreign companies have a record of instantly passing price increases to UK customers, but failing to adjust them fast enough when the prices are falling. Also, utility companies with international reach can easily transfer profits from one part of the world to another, rather than reinvest them in infrastructure. For example, in 2011, it was disclosed that Iberdrola, the Spanish owner of Scottish Power, used cash surplus at its Scottish Power subsidiary to make a 10-year loan of 800 million to its sister company. Disclosure of the transfer had come weeks after Scottish Power had raised prices of the energy it supplied to its customers. Foreign ownership also raises issues of political and energy security. What happens when an international company has a squeeze of supply? Who would they prioritise, their home country or the UK? I am personally shocked by how much infrastructure in the UK is foreign owned. For instance, from my personal experience of living in the UK, I would say that our trains are in pretty bad shape. You can't really take a train without them being delayed or cancelled. The minor of issues seems to stop or delay trains in the UK. And just to give you a bit of data, in 2023, only 56% of British trains managed to be punctual. On top of that, Britain has some of the highest train fares in Europe. The state took back ownership of the infrastructure, but rail franchises run on Network Rail tracks. In the past, Arriva, a British company, came to own and run large numbers of rail routes, and it did well and expanded to Europe. However, it was bought by a German company, Deutsche Bahn, in 2010. Unions criticised the takeover, saying that Deutsche Bahn would cut the workforce by half and that domestic German investment was more likely than running cross-country franchises. More recently, Deutsche Bahn has agreed a deal to sell Arriva Group to Miami-based infrastructure investor Squared Capital. Deutsche Bahn had attempted selling parts of Arriva in the past in order to raise cash to lower its debt and invest in domestic infrastructure. One does wonder how well a Miami-based private equity firm will run the London buses and UK-based rail network, and I am personally not optimistic of this deal. Connex, for example, the French owner of British Rail Southern Region, had a less than impressive performance, including poor punctuality and a failure to invest in rolling stock. The franchise, awarded in 1996, was due to run till 2011, but the Strategic Rail Authority cut it back to 2003 due to poor financial management and a loss of confidence. This company had seen ownership as a shortcut to making profits. Then, if we look at something like HS1, the cost of construction was 6.84 billion. At 51 million per mile, this was higher than other similar projects in many other countries. The British taxpayers effectively subsidise this construction, and apart from the cost and the government being unable to build this at a reasonable price, what other issues are there? Who is actually receiving the money for the train fares? Its train operators are Eurostar and Southeastern. Eurostar, which has headquarters in Brussels, and Southeastern, whose parent group appears to be Global Via, which is Spanish owned. So chances are that the profits from these train operators will go abroad, even though the whole project was financed by the British taxpayer. This kind of situation I just find absolutely unbelievable. Even if we look at something like ports are a catalyst for economic development as they enable trade and support supply chains. In 2006, the UK started selling off its ports. Goldman Sachs bought Associated British Ports for 2.8 billion. Forth Ports, the last remaining British port, was sold for 754 million in 2011 to an assortment of financial groups who took control of Tilbury Docks and several other Scottish ports. Our imports and exports from cars to raw materials pass through ports connected by rail and haulage operations. Income is generated by container and terminal handling fees, shipping agencies, financial services, and insurance, and these are now not in our national control. My question really is, how on earth can we develop cohesive and efficient infrastructure with so many different parties at play? Our infrastructure needs to be aligned with national interest. The economy needs reliable infrastructure to connect supply chains and efficiently move goods and services across borders. Infrastructure is essential to function a modern economy. A 2012 study by the World Bank in Washington found that infrastructure helps to determine the success of manufacturing and agricultural activities. Infrastructure needs constant support and a high level of investment. In 2005 to 2010, 150 billion was invested in new basic facilities in the UK. Some argue that 500 billion will be needed over the next 10 years, and ultimately the cost of this will be paid by those living in the UK. The UK should be concerned that the path Britain has been happy to go down has not been adopted by other countries. It has not been adopted by a country like the US, for instance. When Britain sold off its P&O ports, the deal was restructured so that the ports which were going to be sold off in North America remained under the US control. There seems to be no long-term modelling or impact of a particular decision to sell off part of the UK's infrastructure on the long-term economic future of the UK. If we look at a country like China, who has the Belt and Road Initiative, the Chinese government is responsible for a global infrastructure development, which invests in more than 150 countries. The UK cannot even manage its own infrastructure in its own tiny country, and I would argue its approach to this needs an urgent review, especially if the government is committed to increasing the UK's population through mass migration. It does desperately need robust infrastructure in place. I personally don't think that the solution is to nationalise infrastructure, having worked in public sector and seen how incredibly inefficient it is. But this area does need more review and oversight from the government.